My name is Rob, and I'm happy to guide us in a short little mindfulness meditation practice before we start. We'll be talking a little bit about mindfulness and science, so I thought it might be lovely to start with a short practice to taste it just a little bit today before we start. So inviting everybody to find a comfortable seated position, whatever that means for you. Sometimes it can be nice to be a little bit upright and alert if that's accessible to you. And you don't need to, you can find whatever is comfortable for you in this moment. Everything I invite is invitational, so please participate to whatever extent feels comfortable and safe for you. Maybe I'll start with 3 sounds of this small bell. This can be an invitation to just come back to our body, come back to this present moment. Our minds can so quickly run to the future or be dwelling caught in our past. Maybe we had a busy day today. Maybe for a student, finals are happening and other things are happening in our lives. And it might be nice just to settle into this room and this space together. So maybe our mindfulness practice will just be these 3 sounds of the bell. And as we hear them, we can invite our attention back to our breath, the bell as an anchor, bringing mind and body together. If the breath isn't a comfortable space for you, you can always choose to focus on maybe your feet on the ground, sensation in the fingertips. If the breath is a nice place for you, maybe just paying attention to the tip of the nose, lower belly, wherever feels safe and comfortable. So we'll listen to 3 sounds of the bell to get us started. Those on Zoom, we'll see how the audio goes, but at least you can know in person here, we can hear the sound nice and bright and clear. Either way, following a few breaths with me now. When you're ready, if your eyes were closed, feel free to open them, come back to our space, and I hope you enjoy tonight's presentation.
So, welcome to our event, Science and Mindfulness, Pathways Toward Healing.
This event is being put on in collaboration between the University of Toronto's Buddhism, Psychology and Mental Health program, the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation, and the BPSU, which we are both a part of.
We'd like to open the event by reading a land acknowledgement.
We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island.
We understand the role of settler colonial privilege and that this land acknowledgement cannot undo immensely violent histories against Indigenous peoples on these lands. As a class and as individuals, we want to work to dismantle the legacy of colonial systems that impact all aspects of our practices to the best of our ability. Through our participation in this work, and in holding ourselves accountable, we carry forward with a commitment to listen, learn and unlearn, and grow.
So now we'd like to call up our MC, Mark Miller.
Thanks, everyone. Wow, what a great thing. Who gets to come to science talks and it starts with a practice? I mean, how wonderful is that? And it's really what we're doing here today. I thought just to set a little bit of context would be nice before I introduce our wonderful speakers and what I am sure are going to be wonderful talks. First, we are in sort of what you might think of as the golden age of contemplative science. Science and contemplative programs are coming together in ways that they've never been together before, probably because we have more practitioners on earth than we've ever had, which are producing just wonderful teachers and lights in our age. And our science is digging deeper and deeper. It wasn't so long ago, we got the fMRI. We're starting to be able to really look under the hood. And with that confluence of people interested in contemplative programs, and as our science gets better and better, there are just some really unique and remarkable and I think impactful synergies that are emerging. And that's sort of what we're going to hear tonight for some real lights here at University of Toronto, who this is the thing that they do. They bring together science and spirituality, science and Buddhist contemplative programs. That's one thread. The second thread, of course, is the wonderful Thich Nhat Hanh. If you don't know Thich Nhat Hanh, this is essential human reading. So get on it. Start at Wikipedia, dig deep. I think lots of people here already know Thich Nhat Hanh. He's a Zen master, poet, scholar, activist, widely acknowledged to be one of the great pioneers who brought the Buddha's Dharma out of the monastery and applied it in our real world, in education and health and business. And you're going to hear two wonderful talks tonight from within that teaching stream. So that's the second thread that's really holding these things together tonight. At the heart of Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings is the idea of community. In the Sanskrit, that's Sangha. I love that for tonight. Not only are we sort of all here as a community, that's cool. You know, even starting off with the practice is so wonderful. But also I think the community of scientists and practitioners, that's another important community that is producing these wonderful new synergies. And I think if it's working right, and I think the two talks you're going to get tonight are good representations of it working right. If it's working right, then we'd like to think that these synergies help us to be better communities, that the synergy between science and contemplation might help us live in a better community style way to flourish as communities. So we've got two people tonight. We've got brother Phap Linh. Where are you? Can I see you somewhere? Yeah, there he is. He's above me. I don't know if you can see him. He's there. Exactly. He's an ordained monk in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition. He studied math at Cambridge. Before he ordained, he was a composer. So what a wonderful background. He's going to be speaking tonight about some of these remarkable synergies that are possible between science and contemplation. And our second speaker is the wonderful and always powerful Elli Weisbaum right here, our event coordinator. I really even think we should just give a round of applause. This is what she does, you know, like she just brings together wonderful people and creates remarkable spaces. And I have to actually read all of her accolades because there are so many wonderful things. I know I'm so embarrassing, right? She's currently the program director of the Buddhist Psychology and Mental Health program here at University of Toronto. And if you are interested in science and contemplation, this is the place in Canada. So like you're here, right? That's happening here. This is the place. That's one of the people. So how great is that, right? She's jointly appointed with the Department of Psychiatry and is also cross-appointed with the Dalai Lama School of Public Health. Elli, if you sum up what she does, I mean, how do you sum up a human like this? But she is a master of creating spaces, academic spaces, occupational spaces where people learn how to be well. She's been practicing within the Thich Nhat Hanh stream since she was 10. And we're going to hear some of her new research today about the interface between Thich Nhat Hanh and mindfulness and medical practitioners, which I think is one of the real edges where I think this synergy is making a real impact. I think if anybody can benefit from this, people on the front line can. And we're going to hear about some of that tonight. And last things, and then I'm going to go. Tonight is also a little bit of a labor of love. Brother Phap Linh and Elli are longtime friends. So this is more than a decade of them being friends and collaborators and teaching together and traveling together and eating together and loving together. And this is, I mean, they're going to tell you what they've been doing and what they've been up to. And I just think that that's a remarkable starting place for a night like this. So maybe we just get a round of applause for our speakers first. Thanks for making the time, and applause to you guys too. Thanks for making the time to come out tonight. It's these sort of events that make a real impact on our community. Okay, that's enough from me. Brother Phap Linh, I'd love to hear something about science and meditation from you.
Thank you so much, Mark, for the very generous introduction. It's wonderful to be with everybody tonight. And yeah, I think science and Buddhism, or science and spirituality, science and mindfulness, these are things that can go together. But the headline for me is that it's really about good science and good Buddhism. Good science can go with good Buddhism, but there's also bad science and there's sometimes bad Buddhism. So I'm going to start by sharing a little bit of my story, how I got into this business. So as you've heard, I was a student at Cambridge studying mathematics. And it happened for one reason or another that I ended up going to a retreat in Plum Village, aged 19. So superficially, I didn't really know why I was going. I was kind of curious. I thought I wanted to figure out, like, what is the nature of reality, just, you know, something simple like that. It seemed to me that there was, the big question to resolve was, is there just stuff like matter? You know, do we have this story that's given to us by kind of scientific materialism, which is that the universe is made up of bits of stuff, which is still a little bit mysterious what that exactly that stuff is, whether it's strings or particles or fields or, you know, something along those lines. And these bits of stuff interact together according to physical laws. We don't know why there's all this stuff, but once there's all the stuff and you have the laws, then everything is pretty much deterministic. It all kind of unwinds or winds up like big clockwork. And within the scope of that story, the whole thing is essentially meaningless, kind of, you know, inert, dead. There's nothing that can account for our experience of consciousness, our experience of love or altruism, kindness, any of these things. None of those things fit in that story. So if any of you have read Richard Dawkins, you know, I read Richard Dawkins when I was 15. The Selfish Gene had an enormous impact on me. And, you know, according to that story, we, within this big sort of mechanical clockwork universe, are also just biological machines, who are also essentially purposeless. We're just kind of cellular automata, you know, responding to the sort of happenstance of, you know, molecules turning into cells, and cells learning how to reproduce. But all of that is accidental, and then we, in all our behavior, all of our society, all of our civilization, is basically just the sort of working out of this selection process for genes to be able to increase their chances of successfully reproducing themselves. And that's a kind of bleak story. I found this incredible. It was devastating for me as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old. I was like, wow, okay, well, if this is true, then that means that everything that I experience as my own impulse towards kindness is not real. That means it's fake. Right? If this is true, then when I'm being kind, I'm actually just trying to maximize my chances of reproductive success. I mean, that is incredibly bleak. It means all of spirituality, all of religion, all of love, all of altruism, all fake, all meaningless. It's all just a kind of performance, a set of games that we play to increase our reproductive, our chances of reproductive success. And that I found incredibly depressing, but I also couldn't argue with it at the time. I didn't have a good way to refute this view. And so a few years later, at university, I was still trying to figure out, like, either that's true, there's just matter work, interacting according to these physical laws, or there's something else. And I was very interested in the possibility of, is there something else? Is there something that we can call meaning? That would be nice. Is there something that we can call love? Is there something that we can call altruism? Is there spirituality? And if there is, what is it? Like, what would that even mean? It was all quite mysterious to me. But then I heard about this Zen master called Thich Hanh, who lived in France in a monastery. Wasn't so far away from me. And I heard you could go there in the summer. You could just go and you could sort of show up and visit. And I thought, well, if anybody knows, then this man should know. Right? People say that he's enlightened, whatever that might mean. So I thought, well, what have I got to lose? I'll go check it out. So I go to Plum Village with 3 other friends from Cambridge, and I spend the whole time really trying to fight Thich Nhat Hanh intellectually, mentally. As I was listening to everything he was saying, I was desperately trying to refute anything and everything, because that's how I was trained. I was trained, intellectually to question everything, to be skeptical of everything, to try and find the flaw, to find, the logical contradiction, to try to take things apart. And for the first time in my life, really the first time in my life, I was encountering, these things that he was saying, and I was powerless. I couldn't refute anything. It was really upsetting, actually. It was really annoying. I was desperately trying to sort of hold my ground, say, no, there must be something about this that's, contradictory or illogical, it doesn't make sense. I couldn't find anything. So sort of, I guess I was like a reluctant Buddhist, a reluctant meditator. And then eventually, after 7-8 years of going to retreats in Plum Village, I was a reluctant monk. I was like, okay, well, I wish I could find a reason to disagree with you, but I can't. This really does seem to work. It seems to, it has completely changed my life. It's given me a way to be in touch with my feelings, right? Which is, aged 19 when I first went to Plum Village. Although I thought I was going to figure out the nature of reality, what I was actually the real reason I went to Plum Village, I think now when I look back, is that I was trying to figure out how to deal with grief, because my mother had died 18 months before, and nothing in my, so-called scientific worldview, my skepticism, my rationality, or probably pseudo-rationality, could equip me to deal with this incredible loss. Within the within the story of science that I had, my mother was just a sort of semi-stable pattern of neural activity, and that once that was finished, then she's gone, and it didn't even mean anything anyway. So what's the point of feeling anything? What's the point of grieving? I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to feel anything. I was numb. And in fact, I was in a deep depression without really realizing it. And when I got to Plum Village, I really expected Thich Nhat Hanh to be talking about the nature of reality. I sort of thought he was going to tell us, well, which is it? Is it matter, or is it, magic? Basically, I was like, Either it's particles or you can levitate and there's telepathy and there's all the other stuff. And that's, I wanted to know, just like, come on, just tell us, which one is it? Is it this or is it that? And instead, what he talked about was bringing your attention back to your breath, bringing your mind back to your body, becoming aware of the contact of your feet on the ground, recognizing the presence of your ancestors in every cell of your body, recognizing the presence of your ancestors, your mother, your father, your grandparents, in every habit of body, of speech, of thinking, every emotional reaction, how so much has been transmitted to us over so many generations. And it was incredibly annoying. I really didn't want to hear about any of that because, of course, all of that was bringing me closer to my pain, which I wanted desperately to ignore or avoid if at all possible. And I was, much easier to stay in the realm of intellectual theories and, and nice, comfortable abstractions rather than get into this messy business of actually feeling anything. But I couldn't resist, like I said, and eventually my resistance crumbled and I got in touch with my grief. And of course, my life started working much better once I learned how to do that, how to integrate that experience. So that's a little bit of how I got into this business. And now, 16, 17 years later, of monastic life later, I ask myself how we can help, how this marriage of science and spirituality can actually make a difference in our world. When I look at the situation of our planet now, I don't think I need to convince anybody that we're in a bit of trouble in several different domains. We could call it the poly crisis. And what I find fascinating is my observation is that somewhat independent of what any of us, the 8 billion of us human beings on this planet, it's somewhat independent of what we actually believe to be the case about the nature of reality, whether scientific materialism or spirituality of various kinds. When it comes to matters of global governance, right? So decisions about how to mitigate the effects of, extreme climate change, or, how to do the adaptation necessary for the kinds of changes in our climate that we're already experiencing in many parts of the world, and that more or less all of us are going to be experiencing pretty soon. When it comes to those questions, somewhat independent of our actual beliefs, we default to using the frame of scientific materialism, right? So when it comes to the boardrooms and the conference rooms and the committee rooms, at these global summits, and the levers that we believe we have at our disposal are sort of geophysical ones. It's like, how do we reduce carbon in the atmosphere? How do we, change decrease the amount of pollution? All the things that we think of doing exist within a world which is made of matter, right? and it's essentially an inert world. The world itself, in that view, is not doing anything. It's not acting. It's just happening, according to physical law. Like, we don't think of the earth as being a conscious entity, or the ecosystem as being something that can have an active response, that could choose, that could have agency. Typically, we think of ourselves as being the only agentic things around, right? We're on the stage, but the stage is just, scenery. It's just backdrop. Like, we're the only things. The human beings are the only things doing anything. And in fact, in the absolute extreme scientific materialist view, even we are not doing anything, right? Like if you listen to most modern philosophers of mind, they will tell you that there's no such thing as free will. So everything is an illusion, including our consciousness. Well, where does that leave you? It's a kind of nihilism, basically. It's incredibly bleak. It means that it doesn't matter because we're not doing anything anyway. It's all automatic processes just unfolding. So for me, this belief that the world is made just of stuff, of particles and, interacting according to physical law is very much at the root of this present crisis, or the polycrisis. The fact that we think that the world is indifferent to what we do to it, and nature even. For many, many years, we have, in the scientific community, maintained the belief that although animals could feel pain, that they didn't suffer, right? They didn't have psychological experience of suffering because they couldn't anticipate the future, etc. We know this to be wrong, right? Anybody who has a pet knows this is completely false. And what we now know is it's also just bad science. Right? There's so much evidence. If I don't know if you're aware, if you think of all the studies that you've heard about animal intelligence or animal kind of consciousness or feeling, capacity for feeling, can you think of a single one that has gone in the direction of saying that animals, or indeed even plants, have less intelligence or less capacity for feeling than we thought? I can't think of one. They all go the other way. They all go in the direction of, oh, actually, now we realize that, all mammals essentially have the same feeling states that we do. And then it's like, kind of probably birds too. And by now it's, and then, we have crustaceans and mollusks, and by now it's insects. Now we have studies that show that bumblebees have emotional states, that they can kind of get traumatized, and this kind of stuff, that they can experience joy. And, so it's just, it seems to me that we are operating within a very, a worldview which has allowed us to exploit, to extract, to use other species, even other human beings, and the earth itself, and tell ourselves that it didn't matter, that there was no consequence. But now science is catching up and saying we know this to be wrong, and so we need a transformation of this worldview. And so the question for me, I know that I'm going to run out of time quite soon, but the question for me is, how do we change our worldview? Right? This should be on, on every course, in every university, is how do we become aware of our bias? And how do we cultivate openness of mind? Right? I think it's generally the case that we all agree that to be open-minded would be a great thing. But you can't just tell somebody, oh, be open-minded. There has to be praxis. There has to be a way to cultivate openness of mind. And for me, everything that I've learned from my teacher and in Zen Buddhism is that. So Zen Buddhism, at its core, is fundamentally anti-dogmatic. The whole training is not to give you more ideas. Right? I thought I was going to go to Plum Village and get some ideas about the nature of reality and somebody just tell me the answer. No, all I got was, here's how to become aware of the ideas you have and to remove them. And here's, remove another idea. Come back to directly experiencing reality in the present moment, in your body, not mediated by any conceptual construct, including language. So that's the amazing thing. Like, if we really want to do good science, we know that we need this fundamental open-mindedness. And we know that ultimately the mind is the fundamental instrument of scientific exploration and discovery. All right, it doesn't matter how good our telescopes and our microscopes and our particle accelerators are, if our mind is, burdened by biases, by attachment to some kind of metaphysical position, even materialism. I mean, it's actually especially materialism. The funny thing about science is that it's become scientism. In fact, science has nothing to say about metaphysics. Metaphysics is inaccessible to science. And yet somehow we've done this sort of sleight of hand trickery whereby, a kind of hypothetical model of what may be the case has just become the default, like this is the case, this is the nature of reality. Whereas in fact, science has no way to prove either way whether there is matter or there isn't matter. It's inaccessible to science. As the great physicist Max Planck said, you can't get behind consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. Right? There's no way to get to get outside of the fact that all we have available to us is our own experience. Right? There's no way to ground any other belief in a sort of external physical reality. So any good scientist should know that. And then the question should be, well, when we know that, how do we really, it's one thing to know it intellectually, but how do we free ourselves from these habits of thought, which are even embedded in our language, in our ways of speaking? And I think that's where Buddhism could really help. Buddhism can offer a path of training, good Buddhism, right? Good, because you can get dogmatic Buddhists too, right? You can get sort of almost, there's theistic versions of Buddhism. There's Buddhisms the versions of Buddhism that propose just an alternative worldview. But I think the purest kind of Buddhism offers no worldview. It offers a methodology for examining for yourself the nature of reality, and for seeing what habits of mind and hidden assumptions are present in our mind. So the first thing that we need to do, if we're going to take care of this fundamental instrument of scientific observation and discovery, which is the mind, is that we have to observe the mind. We have to have a way to start to look at it as it's functioning. And this is mindfulness. So mindfulness is basically just starting to pay attention to what is happening inside and around us in the present moment, including in our ways of thinking. And what we quickly discover is that you can't understand the functioning of the mind until you understand the functioning of your emotions, right? And your body, because the body is, is completely interdependent with the mind, and the mind is interdependent with the body. They can't be separated. And although we've been under the spell of the idea of, rationality as being kind of the best, the purest form of thinking, the purest and most powerful way to determine the nature of truth and reality, what we've actually now known for 40 years in the neuroscience community is that, in fact, what we call rationality is the we have more like the image of a tree or a forest, and rationality is the canopy, but the root is emotion. So all consciousness starts in affect, starts in basically feeling states, and then gets elaborated into what we call rationality. So unless we know how to recognize our emotions, care for them, maybe even calm them, quiet them, then there's no way we can stabilize the mind and have any kind of clarity of observation. So if I can leave you with something practical, right? I mean, there's so much more that could be said on this, on this topic, but I want to give you a little bit of the how-to, right? Because I talked about there's a how-to. There's a how to change our worldview. There's a how to recognize our biases. There's a how to cultivate fundamental openness of mind or epistemic humility. And I think the first thing that we can do is to learn to bring our attention back to the body. And it turns out that the bridge between the mind and the body is the breath. So right now you could just notice your in-breath, notice your out-breath. And there's a very humbling part of that noticing, which is to realize how unstable our minds are, how distractible we are, how caught up in narration of our own experience we are, in our inner monologue, in, sort of thoughts, regrets, worries, anxieties. So it's quite humbling to realize, like, oh, I'm not really as much in control of my mind. Even if I wanted to just stably and calmly pay attention to my in-breath and out-breath for several minutes, maybe I actually can't. And maybe that needs some training. And so then the path of training opens from that realization of our own distractibility, to realize, like, oh, okay, maybe I just need to learn how to pay attention to 3 breaths. And then from there we can, pay attention to 10 breaths, and then gradually our attention stabilizes, and maybe that little inner narration of experience at some point the volume goes down, and then maybe even stops. And we can discover what it's like to experience life without being mediated by linguistic framings of our experience, or even conceptual framings. And that, I think, is real openness of mind. And then we might be in a position to make some great leaps forward as scientists. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to hand it over to my wonderful colleague and dear friend, Elli, who's going to tell you about how this works out in practice. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for that. And yes, thank you for lining up kind of where we're going to head next. I'm going to be sharing some slides in a moment about a research study, but just hearing kind of what was just shared, and to think we heard some maybe hypotheses or proposals on the table about, there's this thing that we might do to look into ourselves, and how might that impact our internal landscape, our external landscape, and this how. I love that this word came up. There's a how, and that's what I'm always really curious about. You heard a little bit, a long-term practitioner in this tradition, also a researcher, scientist, and teacher at this university here. Also maybe students or former alumni, if you could wave at me. I see a bunch of you. Hi, great to have you. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides and kind of give myself permission to dive in. I was thinking about what speed I would present at. I know I have some self-awareness from my practice, and I'm going to give myself permission, because I want us to have time for panel Q&A, to go at what my colleagues, I know someone's here from the Sick is Mindfulness Project, we might call grand round speed. So buckle up for the Plum Village practitioners that are here. I'll try and hit some Dharma Hall speed like once or twice, but I'm giving myself permission to go at that other one. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about a recent study that came out in CMAJ Open, the Canadian Medical Journal Association, that I published with my wonderful co-authors, Dr. Nicholas Chatty and Trevor Young, just to give us a minute to hear the words. So improving physician wellness through the applied mindfulness program for medical personnel, findings from a prospective qualitative study. Wow, in medicine, we give things long titles. But let's jump into what this is and how it interacts. And I'm just going to, can we unblock the top of the slide if possible? Is that something I do here? Give us one moment.
Click OK.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, team. All right. So I want to share a little bit about this research study. I'm going to move through some of the methods and methodology. And over the course of this presentation, there may be some of you who are researchers who are like, yep, following all that. And maybe some of us don't have that background. And then on the other end, I'm going to share some language from the practice and the Dharma. And that might be a surprise for some of you. So buckle up, we'll go on this journey together. And then when we get to the findings, I think that is very relatable to whatever context we are coming from. So in this study, we had a few different aspirations, and I want to start by sharing one that's really in my heart. You might already have picked up on some of this from this event today, but I'm really interested in this question of how we build bridges between science and Dharma, which is a Sanskrit word for this body of knowledge and teachings that we're talking about. And so I want to share with you a quote. This comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, my teacher, Phap Linh's teacher in this tradition and stream. And for me, this is actually a quote that starts my 400-page dissertation, which if you're ready to read it after this, you can download from T-Space. But it starts with this quote. And this is something that I bring into this work as I think about what it means to bring this knowledge stream into different spaces. Meditators since the beginning of time have known that they must use their own eyes and the language of their own times to express their insight. Wisdom is a living stream, not an icon to be preserved in a museum. Only when a practitioner finds the wisdom in his or her own life can it flow to future generations. Keeping the torch of wisdom glowing is the work of all of us who know how to clear a path through the forest in order to walk ahead. And for me, this quote has often been an anchor to give myself permission to think, what's next? Where are we going next with this? Where do we want to bring our voices? What is the language of our times? And so I think that's such an interesting orientation for me as I do this work. For the study itself, we had a few central aims. So we had two main foci. One was that we were interested in making a mindfulness program tailored specifically to the needs of physicians, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then also we were interested in examining the feasibility, acceptability, and impact on daily life. And so these are some words that we're going to come back to over the course of the presentation. I'm going to zip through the methods. For those of you interested in what does it actually look like to do a study like this, the protocol and paper is fully published, so we can dive in further. But to say this was a prospective qualitative study, so it was conducted with 45 physicians across different specialties, and I'll be sharing what those are in a later slide. We had ethics approval from the Hospital for Sick Children and also the University of Toronto. We took a purposive sampling approach. So we specifically to enhance sample specificity, who was included in the study, we did a pre-survey at intake, and we were looking for longer years of medical practice and less years of mindfulness experience. So this idea perhaps of having been in a system that has certain perspectives and views for a long time and maybe more naive in the phenomena of mindfulness. And when we get to the findings, you'll see how this informs some of our data analysis. For data generation, we did participant observations. So in each of the program sessions for the mindfulness, we had someone sitting in taking field notes. And this is specifically because as qualitative researchers, we like to stick close to the data and recontextualize as we're reading our data, these interviews. It's very helpful to say, okay, in session 3, a bunch of people maybe expressed they were uncomfortable. What else was happening? You know, there maybe was a snowstorm that day. So to have someone in the session kind of taking notes on group dynamics. And then we did semi-structured interviews post-session. And so the semi-structured interviews were our main source of data and what we analyzed in the study for our findings that I'm going to be sharing. We applied thematic analysis for anyone looking for a kind of, as we're thinking about building bridges, for me, you know, doing qualitative research, taking data that is people's lived experiences, having some sort of systematic way of moving through that data that can speak to both the lens of scientific inquiry and what we know about being human, which is we are messy and nonlinear. I highly recommend looking into TA Braun and Clark's publication on that. It's a wonderful kind of approach to talking to and asking really good questions of your data. And again, the protocol, we can share links to it in the post email and also here. It's freely downloadable. So if you're interested in seeing what our interview data, our guide was, getting all the information on how we handle transcription, all that is published and available online. So in the study, in a qualitative study, we use a research question. So rather than a hypothesis and going into it with a presupposition of what we might find, we like to start with a question, and this kind of acts as our anchor throughout the study that we return to. So in this study, we asked, how do physicians experience, make sense of, and engage with a 5-week applied mindfulness program? And what is the impact on their personal well-being in the context of their daily lives? And we had some guiding sub-questions as well. And I'm going to come back to this question in a moment, but I want to just ask this question: why should we care about physician wellness? And then talk a bit about how this is transferable to other disciplines. So why we were interested in physician wellness is that physicians play a really critical role in our healthcare systems, and yet their own well-being is often overlooked. And I may ask those of you who come from different disciplines also how this might transfer to your context. So just by a show of hands in the room, and I'll share for those joining online, how often do you feel perhaps like the system that you're in, you are doing a lot of work for, but your own well-being may be overlooked? Can anyone relate to this? So just to say, some of what I'm sharing may sound specific, physician specific, but in qualitative research, rather than saying it's replicatable, we would say it's transferable. So as I go through these findings, I really invite you to think how this question, context of daily life, does it transfer to where you are? And so the prioritizing of wellness in the literature is shown to be perpetuated by both the individuals and the systems of which they're part. This is a key contributing factor to high levels of attrition that we see. And again, all of this is in the lit review in the paper if you want to dive into any of it. And again, just want to say that this literature is reflective across allied health, across caring professions, and really across society. And so you'll hear this word of well-being, and the word I was about to say when I said this is transferable is that we're seeing a lot of burnout. And that's a word we may hear a lot about. It's one of the scales that we use. And the reason I want to bring that up is I want to talk about why we were specific in choosing this term well-being and not burnout when we designed the study. And so just some ideas for thought. As Phap Linh was saying, sometimes we are limited by words. They send us in particular directions. As human beings, we get very attached to that structure. And so something I'm also curious about as a researcher and just a human being is, what is our asset-based versus deficit-based language? How, as both researchers and individuals, does this impact our approach to the work we do, to how we're using our lives? And so as someone adding to the literature, I specifically chose to use the word well-being. It's asset-based, and it comes with terms like flourishing, thrive, engage, that we've already heard throughout the course of this talk tonight. And again, not to say that we are suppressing or never using the deficit-based terms. I think noticing burnout, right? That what Phap Linh was saying, do we know what's here? Do we know how to see? And so for me, knowing that there may be burnout present in myself in this moment, I can then ask the question, what are the steps I'm taking? How do I know how to resource myself? What does it look like to move towards thriving? And so I really encourage all of us as researchers and humans. Sometimes I'm like, what are my research questions for myself today? And recently they've been very deficit-based. And so that gave me some information. I was like, Elli, I was preparing this presentation. I looked at the slide. I was like, this is a good question for you right now. How am I asking myself questions? What's the language I'm using to describe my own experience? And so this mindfulness word, what's that all about? Going to give a little bit of literature on that. But just to say, it's very popular right now, which is great. I get asked to do lots of presentations. And what is it? Why is it? Why are we curious about it? There's an incredible body of continuing to kind of exponentially grow literature that's looking at this. Some things just to share now is that for clinicians, it's been shown to support, better focus and working memory, cognitive flexibility, which we were talking about. What might it look like if those and everyone around us was going, I'm curious about that. Where else might we go with that, right? So cognitive flexibility is one of the outcomes I'm very curious and interested about. For patients, we've seen it have an impact on focused problem solving, adaptive behavior, improved mental health and well-being. So there's lots of rich food for thought in the literature if this is something that we're interested in. Now, I also want to come back to the research question and share a bit about another term that I think is really important to highlight here, which is this idea of applied mindfulness. Applied being that there's something we can do. And also as researchers, we like to be precise. We have this term mindfulness that can kind of be a catch-all phrase for a lot of different things. And so for me, I'm very interested in also naming the tradition I come from and kind of the type of mindfulness that I'm practicing. And so the term applied mindfulness, and shout out to Phap Linh, I can't see you right now, but Phap Linh we're going to get into this, one of the advisors who actually advised on my research study. I'm going to talk about what it means to work with the wisdom community and bring that in. But I had been using the term engaged mindfulness. And if we know a bit about the history of Thich Nhat or this movement, engaged mindfulness, a term coined in literature by Thich Nhat, really looking at what it means to bring this into activism and engagement. And Brother Phap Linh is one of the few people who has read all 400 pages and said to me, he's like, Thai was iterating that. He was continuing to innovate. He's been using this term applied. I think that applies more to what you're doing right now. And so looking at terminology, we use this term because applied mindfulness is focused on pragmatic application of mindfulness in daily life. And we can describe this type of mindfulness as the observational, lucid awareness of what is happening inside and around us in the present moment. As I think about building bridges, my scientist brain wants to translate this into awareness of relevant stimuli impact on one's internal and external states. And so for me, I also want to highlight that when we talk about applied mindfulness, we're talking about something that is part of a training pathway that goes beyond bare attention, allowing the practitioner to develop competences related to inner and interpersonal communication. So some of the words that I bring in from the spaces of academia then would be like increased self-regulation of feelings, thoughts, actions, and interactions. So I'm going to share a little bit about the program that we designed for this research study and what it looked like, and then I'm going to move into some of the actual findings. So to our knowledge, and when I started my PhD, some of you may be able to relate to this, I thought I was going to do this whole other thing. And then I started looking at what was actually in the literature, and I discovered that to date, to the best of our knowledge, there hadn't been a mindfulness-based intervention or program explicitly based on the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. So I thought, okay, we got to back up and do that piece. And so I worked on designing a program based on Thich Nhat Hanh's work in engaged and applied mindfulness. And to do this, I also had this other question. How do we as researchers involve the teachings and work of a wisdom community in what we're doing? And I think this is something as academics, as kind of a global community, we might be asking ourselves right now. And so I was really inspired by teachings and methodologies that come out of Indigenous methodologies and teachings actually out of Canada that have this term, developing an iterative reciprocal relationship. And this is a term that refers to how we can involve a wisdom community, perhaps different forms of knowledge, different bodies of knowledge, or even different bodies that have not always been centered or included in research in the entire research process. So at the University of Toronto, we have something called a PAC, your Program Advisory Committee, made up of academics here who sit on a committee, advise you, give advice, vote, and follow your entire academic journey. And so I made a proposal based on these research methodologies from Indigenous communities to create what we were calling a MAC, which was like the PAC, but made up of monastics from Plum Village, from the actual wisdom tradition. And so I had both a PAC and a MAC. Brother Phap Linh was one of the MAC members. And this was a part of the whole process. So if you look at the steps of thematic analysis, we're going from all the way from the initial kind of coding and looking at data all the way through to publishing the study. And I can say I really walked the walk because 2 days before we sent in the final editorial piece to CMAJ Open, I had a question both for Nicholas Chatty and Trevor Young, my co-authors. We were checking on the conflict of interest section and who is disclosing what and exactly what their titles were. And then I was texting with Brother Phap Linh because we were trying to figure out where and when we were capitalizing or not, like applied mindfulness. It was this wonderful moment of actually just being in dialogue about some last minute kind of spelling issues with both my PAC and my MAC. And so that was a fun moment for me a few months ago. And so the program that we designed, the Applied Mindfulness Program, is based on a rigorous review and adaptation of a Plum Village 5-day retreat. And so we kind of had this research question, like, can you code what you would do over 5 days on a retreat and then teach it in a space, say at a hospital, for 2 hours a week over 5 weeks? And so we did a very specific coding of what the different practices are, what the different types of teachings are that you move through a day. And what this looked like was a program that was 1 session per week over 5 consecutive weeks, 2 hours each session. We had a booster session and a focus group, and the sessions included a mix of different deliveries. So we had didactic, hands-on experiential learning, and then take-home activities that people were doing in between. And so I want to take one moment. As I said, I'm speeding through this part. It's a teaser, read the whole article, so that we can actually hear some of the data, which I think is so important. As Phap Linh said, we have the written, we have the spoken, but the lived experience, both as a mindfulness practitioner and as a qualitative researcher, like to me, that's the juicy, delicious stuff. Published in the paper, you can see an outline of all 5 of the sessions. And here I'm just showing 3 of them. And I just want to highlight for you some of the things that are included in the sessions. Before I did this study, people would say like, oh, well, you can't include this for physicians, or like people in this space will want this or that. And I thought, I really wanted to stay and really look at what is the structure, what is the system, the how of this that Thich Nhat Hanh, that Plum Village has taught for over 30 years. What does that look like? Can we translate it into these spaces? So that is something I was really curious about. And so I'm just going to highlight that in the first 3 sessions, you can see that there's a lecture in each one. And for those of you more familiar with this language, I'll just name these out. For those not, come to our courses, we'll teach you all about them. But the first lecture includes the 4 Noble Truths. The second talks about habit energies. The third talks about the 4 nutriments and store consciousness. These are actually like top hits. And so thinking about the kind of what I would call the thought technology or theoretical frameworks that exist in this tradition as being something that are very translatable into these kind of contemporary spaces. And then in between, we had take-home activities, something that participants were practicing in these kind of micro practices each day. In our tradition, we're not necessarily saying you have to sit on a cushion for 20 minutes or an hour every day, although the literature shows that that will change the structure and function of your brain. So go for it if you have time. And this other thing, applied mindfulness, right? And daily life is what we're curious about. And so in this program, also training how we apply it to our breath, our walking, and our eating. Just by a show of hands, if you're joining us online, you can show your own hand to yourself. Who here every day breathes, walks, and eats? Yeah, so these might be good things to start orienting our attention to start training with. And so we did that in this program. So I've zipped through kind of study design and program design, give myself permission to breathe for one moment, and then take you through some of the findings. Grand round speed. All right. So study findings. So when we brought this program to a group of physicians, and again, I want to share my sample size, we use something called the theory of information power, which says, that this is considered a strong sample because each person in the study has a really specific relationship. Again, like we said, we purposefully sampled for longer years of medical practice, fewer years of mindfulness experience. And you can see here some of the specialties that were included in the study, which is quite a vast array, everywhere from emergency, family medicine, oncology, psychiatry, surgery. So this was our sample who participated in the program that you just heard. And we did thematic analysis of post-program interviews. And what was interesting was a key finding that we found was this phrase that mindfulness becomes a way of life. And so I'm going to share now some quotes from participants that inform the claims that we're making in the study. What is the data that have us claiming mindfulness becomes a way of life? And you'll see as I move through this data that we like to keep it contextualized. So each piece of data will be shown with the specialty and also the years of medical practice. So we have some context for perhaps the perspective that's there. So here we're going to hear from a neurologist, 8 years medical practice. I think this is a very practical way of life. I really had no idea what to expect when I started. So this was a pleasant surprise. A surgeon, 40 years medical practice. Mindfulness should be seen as a way of life. Same as doing exercise, same as healthy eating. That's common sense. Everyone should do that. Forensic psychiatry, 13 years. I think the funny thing is that it's permeated things where sometimes I am mindful that it's mindfulness and sometimes it's really infiltrated parts of my life. So this suggestion, mindfulness becomes a way of life. Now I want to take us a little bit further into the data to find out what does that look like? What does it look like when mindfulness becomes this applied way of life? And to do this, we found 2 other key themes that mindfulness encourages behavioral and cognitive changes that facilitate well-being, and mindfulness improves communication with patients and colleagues. And as I like to tell my students, don't take my word for it, hold it up to your own life. And in this case, let's hold it up to the data. So I'm going to move through both themes now and share the words of the participants so you can maybe touch into what that experience was. What does it mean to experience? And this is the research question, right? To experience an applied mindfulness program. And what does that mean for daily life? So this first theme, that mindfulness encourages behavioral and cognitive changes that facilitate well-being. Our summary would be that the integration of applied mindfulness can decrease workplace stressors, resulting in a greater sense of wellness. But again, what is the lived experience of that? So here we're going to hear, and I'm going to read the blue parts as a kind of story, but again, they're contextualized for you within the wider quote because we want to stick closely to the data. So rheumatologist, 25 years medical practice, ophthalmologist, 5 years, cardiologist, 14 years, psychiatry, 20 years. What does it look like to have mindfulness potentially decrease workplace stressors, resulting in a greater sense of well-being? Why is that? I don't bring back all the frustration and stuff that was happening throughout the day. You just take a breath for yourself. You are less anxious or you are less worried. You don't panic as much. The mindful walking was good. When I was getting to the meeting or to the patient, I was more relaxed and more present in a way. I think I am more forgiving with myself, with my patients. And again, I invite you to hold this up to your own lived experience for yourself or with the colleagues you interact with or your families. What would it be like, or even your experience with the medical practitioners that you go to care for you? What would it be like if each of those people or yourself brought back less of the frustration from the day, was able to take a breath and feel less anxious or panic less, was able to do this through their eating, their speaking, their walking, that it changed how they listened in their next meeting, and that you or they were more forgiving with themselves. So just hearing those words, holding them up to your own experience. The second theme, mindfulness improves communication with patients and colleagues. Our summary is that there was a benefit to communication patterns, which benefited delivery of care and work relationships and team dynamics. And again, thinking about your situations, and let's just listen. What was that experience of going through, as Phap Linh said, the how, an actual training in observing our own minds and learning how to interact with our external and internal stimuli? What is that experience? So forensic psychiatrist, 13 years, emergency medicine. Irritability is a two-way street. I feel that awareness lets me step out of it. Normally, it will just escalate. But then I think in many cases now with mindfulness, I will try to kind of step away and approach it in a more empathetic way. You come back to your mindfulness breathing and it helps you cope with almost every situation. It gives you immediately the way to react differently, better. Going from one patient to the next, I now take time to breathe so I am able to start over and give my full to the next patient. Because you listen more, you don't already make decisions in your head before you've actually heard the patient out. Mindfulness brought me back and probably being more compassionate, which makes me a better kind of doctor, whole doctor. And so again, just listening in, what are the ways that we have of training ourselves, of connecting to ourselves and others? And so for me, it was really fascinating to explore this data in this kind of systematic, thematic analysis way, and also really hear these lived experiences and the impact it was having on daily life. And if anyone else is watching my time, I'm aware. So I'll take a few minutes just to summarize with my further discussion before we get to the panel. But just to say in summary that we saw from the study, and more work is needed, that over a 5-week period, it's possible to develop a competency in applied mindfulness that can have these positive impacts, and that it can potentially increase patient-centered care, manage occupational stressors, and develop a better work-life balance, which I personally have been practicing for a while and I'm still working on. And I see that there's this great potential for myself and hopefully for the individuals and systems that I work with. We also saw that small doses is an effective way to bring mindfulness into life, and that this was context specific. So surgeons were like, oh, I can do this while the operating room's being cleaned, emergency room while sanitizing, family physicians while taking notes. And I encourage all of you, in your own practice, whatever the things are that resource you, like applied, where do they fit in daily life, and that it is possible to do them in these small doses. One of our participants said this great thing. I remember this piece of data. It was like, mindfulness is kind of on demand. Like it's mine to turn on when I need. That's kind of cool. And I agree. So just to summarize, as researchers, we always like to mention our future directions, wider institutional structural support for work like this, working with different groups, also looking at mixed methods, RCTs, how do we center BIPOC and other marginalized communities' voices in research as researchers, as participants. And we have continued to do this research and look at it in online and in-person delivery. I would be remiss to not talk about my strengths and limitations, which are talked lots more about in the papers. I think that's Mark's laughing at me over here. That's like a human thing I like to do as a mindfulness practitioner as well. And just to say, we had some strength in being the novel use of this particular stream and body of knowledge, that we did this purposive sampling. And also there are limitations to using one body of knowledge and purposive sampling. So non-dual thinking here, we have both. Self-selection could mean more predisposition to accepting the mindfulness. I will say, high level of skepticism in the data, or as one of the participants told us, we are not expletiving you because we are surgeons and we will be serious about this and tell you the truth. The program facilitators were also handpicked for this program with long-term training as both clinicians and practitioners. So again, as we're looking at scalability, these are some questions we have. Quantitative measures were not used. So lots of room for growth within myself and all my research studies at all times. And so just to conclude, we kind of had two key takeaways. One is that there's no need to wait. We can see really positive and beneficial things here that we can bring into our lives right away to impact positive change, both as an individual and in our systems. And for any discipline we're in, as we start to look at what does it mean to flourish and thrive at the same time, we really need to recognize that our occupational spaces and our systems have some real stressors in them, and that further work is needed to affect change at a systems level. So just to conclude with some acknowledgements, a huge thank you to my participants for co-creating this data and space with me. They took their time to share their stories, and I am forever grateful. Denise Castaldo, who's based out of this building, for her qualitative expertise. And this next sentence, I would like to say it's published in a biomedical journal. So back to my original aspiration of bridging the science and Dharma. This is in the publication with deep gratitude to Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh for his teachings and work in the fields of engaged and applied Buddhism, upon which this training program and study is based. A huge thank you to my PAC, my MAC, and my co-authors. With that, I will conclude my presentation so we can get to some Q&A, but thank you for listening here and being part of building community and inquiry around these questions. Thank you.
How great was that? Come on, just one more round of applause. So good. And we have space. Everybody was more or less on time. Great work. Maybe we can start with something in the room. Burning questions, insights, worries, concerns, appreciation. Yeah. On the side. There you go.
Is it on now? Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, that was really wonderful. Thank you both. So my question is kind of both, and all of you are kind of talking about the how of the systems and how mindfulness kind of works, and how that these things can be applied within professional contexts. And so I guess I was wondering a little bit about the why. So why did the participants say that they were there? What brings people to retreats? Like, what brought you to a retreat when you were skeptical? Like, what is that motivation, and how could that maybe be looked at as inspiration for systems change, for, you know, these challenging systems that we operate in, all of us are kind of living in, as like a manifestation for them to be able to have different kinds of changes. So, but you have to answer all of that. You can just, you know, it's a big question. So thank you.
Yeah, we could. Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe we take a few from the room. Let's take 2 or 3, and then we'll amalgamate. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering what is the piece of advice or beacon of hope or just a token of consolation that you'd offer to someone experiencing burnout in the moment, given the exposure that you've had to mindfulness, both in terms of theory and also the lived experiences of the participants that you worked with?
Oh, that's good. So we've got a why and some hope for burnout. One more maybe from the room.
Thank you so much. There's a ton that I want to ask, and I think this might apply more to your work with medical practitioners, but I guess I'm just really interested in the asset versus deficit-based model, because I had shared with you that I also was a patient at Sick Kids, and what drives a lot of my work is like this deficit model that's baked in to our medical system as it exists. So I guess how can mindfulness and how can our work inspire our medical system to become more asset-based?
That's a great collection. Okay. Do you want to go first? Phap Linh first?
I kind of want to let Phap Linh answer first, if you're up for it. Surprise everyone. I'll answer all the Dharma questions. You answer all the medical questions.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that'll work well. There were also some great questions written in from people online, so I might address a couple of those too, if that's okay. So there was Yeah, so there's a really nice question online, which I'll just read to everyone maybe. So it goes like this: as far as I understand, in mindfulness practices, observer and the one who is observed are one. I observe my mind, my mental formations. On the other hand, in scientific research, most of the time the observer is different from that which is observed, at least in the historical dimension. I'm just curious if you think there is a way to bridge the two different methods. So yes, I do think there's a way to bridge the two, because I think one is wrong. And the great thing is that science is catching up with the fact that the observer and the observed are not separate. They're not two, that they co-arise. And in fact, the amazing thing is, like, any good physicist knows this already. Like, the Nobel Prize for Physics in 2022 was awarded to three amazing scientists, Alan Aspect, John Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger. And they basically showed that local realism is not true, right? So what does that mean? It means that basically the naive belief that objects, things like an apple, say, has definite characteristics independent of our observation of them, we now know to be wrong, that the universe is not like that. This is a participatory universe. Consciousness is involved. So nothing has definite characteristics like color, shape, size, all that kind of stuff, independent of our observation of it. Our observation interacts. So that's good science at this point. And the other kind, thinking that we can stand outside of the observation as independent, neutral observers, so-called objective observers, we now know that this is wrong. So it's one thing to know that intellectually, it's another thing for that knowledge to become embodied. Because even as meditation practitioners, we might think that we know in principle, right, that we are one with the object of our observation, so our own mind or our feelings, our breath. It's like I'm aware of my breath, and I know that the awareness and the breath are not separate, right? The awareness is in the breath. It's when I'm aware of my breath and my awareness become one. We know that in principle, but in practice, it's rather difficult because we're so habituated to the separation of subject and object of observation. So again, it's this training process of basically getting out of the framework which is imposed by language. It's language that separates into subject and object of observation. In the present moment, direct experience, unmediated by language, there is no subject and object. There is just experience. So we need to get familiar with that again, and I think that will make us better meditators and better scientists. So maybe I'll stop there and let you take another question, and I can come back and answer some other ones if you want.
Sounds good. We can bounce back and forth like we do in class. Yeah, some really interesting questions here. And maybe I can also ask if one of you maybe can bring over to show me the chat at some point. I'll take a peek at that because I don't have it over here. But from the ones in the room, why did physicians come and participate in this? And again, you can hold it up to your own experience. But what was interesting when I was developing the study, I was like, physicians are so busy, they're not going to participate. You're going to have a really hard time recruiting. Like I just kept hearing this over and over. And I was like, okay, well, let's see, one of the monks I've trained with, Brother Phap Linh, who, for those of you who may be familiar, and those of you will know I love saying this, he likes to say, look for the, not the, so I was like, okay, let's start with the feather, which is I'm going to just send this out to some mailing lists through some academic hospital institutions. We'll see what the uptake is, but everyone kept telling me like, no one's going to sign up. Physicians are not coming. They're not going to make time. And we had room, for about 40 to 50 participants in the study. We had 90 sign up within like a few days of sending out the initial recruitment. We were over full. And so this interesting piece, why was that? And as I spoke with people in the study, and I'll share a bit about the data because we asked that question, what motivated you to come? And as I said, we had a lot of skeptics in the room. The 40-year surgeon comes to my mind in the data saying, oh, well, I came and I thought mindfulness was expletive. And I just came because it was a research study and everyone keeps telling me about mindfulness. And I thought this was a bad idea and I'll come just for your data. That was what they counted. What's fascinating about working with surgeons is they are also trained to look for best practices and implement something if they're interested in it. And so this participant came back the second week and had been doing it every single day just before surgery, was doing a micro practice and was like, yep, I heard it. I heard the first session. It made sense. It sounded like a best practice. I do it before surgery. I'm going to steal your bell. We're going to do it. Like, it was like, bam. Not to overclaim. It was just someone who came in with that perspective. But for me, what was interesting was looking at the data and talking with participants in that study and future studies that we have done since, and also talking about the hope is there seems to be a collective awareness and curiosity amongst the physicians I work with, and also in other fields. And Phap Linh, maybe you can also speak to this, that there is some collective awareness of considerations like burnout, like the increase in mental health challenges that we are seeing across so many domains. And again, this is where I'm interested in that deficit-based and asset-based language, because it could feel overwhelming also when we think about, what is happening to our beloved planet. And looking at one of my students right in front of me who works in this field, who's talked about eco-anxiety, right? That if we focus on the language of anxiety, of burnout, of distress, and we want to be very careful, because in mindfulness, we are never saying suppress, run away from, or ignore. We are actually really interested, as you heard in Phap Linh's talk, and how do we turn towards and embrace and resource and see and take action from a place of seeing what's here? Because if we can't see what's here, we cannot take care of it, right? And so this interesting thing I would say in terms of hope is the physicians that I met and have met in these studies, they're interested, they're curious, they're looking for practices like that surgeon was, even as skeptical as they may be coming in and thinking, oh, this is this popular thing that I'm going to steal your data, and showed up because of this collective awareness that I think is hopeful and building in our systems. I think it is hopeful to say we are in crisis. I actually think that's like a really meaningful thing. And what do we do from there? And so maybe this also speaks to your why, right? Like, why are people showing up? Like, I would rather we weren't all in distress and the planet, and what does it mean to collectively, along with our planet, say, we need some help, we need some community, we need some how. And then that's what I think is really interesting for me about applied mindfulness. And it's, I want to be very careful in the paper. We say this, there isn't one way to care for anything, our health, our planet, each other. And that there is, again, this really hopeful piece around this body of knowledge and teachings that have been designed for thousands of years to look in to what does wellness mean, right? That's what's really interesting to me also sometimes, like, why mindfulness is not this other thing. And like, I'm really open to other things. I've been trained to be not dogmatic. And as a researcher, I want to be precise. I want to look for teachings and practices that speak to the area I'm interested in. How do we become well? How does our planet become well? So I'll pause there and maybe toss it back to Phap Linh. And actually, Mark, do you want to jump in on some of this for a second?
Wow.
Take a minute or two. You're here with us. Get on the camera, and then I'll toss it back to Phap Linh.
I can say something?
Yeah,
really? Is this working? Hello?
You can take this one.
Oh, well, that's cool. Hey, I also do this stuff. That's fun. I didn't know I was going to get a chance to say anything. I will say something quick. I always have something to say, so that's nice. One, why science and contemplative programs? Well, a couple good reasons. One, I think good scientists are probably are being harvested out of contemplative programs. To have a good amount of intellectual humility, which is one of the things you cultivate in a practice, I think is crucial to be a good scientist, to cultivate those internal techniques like attention and awareness and staying in contact with reality. I mean, these are the things you want for a scientist. So really, I think contemplatives make the best scientists. And the other thing is that if we're interested in studying things like the self and consciousness, which are increasingly interesting today in the science world, we need people who are internal investigators as well. It's not just a third-person science. It turns out that it's really great, this is some of the research that we're doing, is to put monastics in scanners. They end up being awesome for this, really, because when you put non-practitioners in an fMRI and then say, do something, who knows what they're doing? You say, well, were you concentrated on that thing? And they say, yes. You're like, do you know what concentration is? because they could just be off in nowhere land. I mean, monastics, I mean, they spend all of their time learning about where their minds are. So when you put them in a scanner and say, pay attention, and then they come out and say, how well did you pay? They say, oh, well, very well. I deviated at 1 minute and at 6 minutes. You're like, that's awesome. Like, you guys are so good to put in scanners. I think that's two good things.
Phap Linh warning.
Oh, why? Tell me.
I was thinking that you might put him in the scanner.
Oh, I would love to put you in a scanner. Actually, that's a great thing to talk about. We've got great EEG kits right now. And so another time, we're looking for monastics. I am going to come back to you. That's great. Yeah, good. Maybe I'll just leave it there because I'd like our experts tonight to say a little more. Phap Linh, would you want to say anything else in rift to this, or should we grab a few more things offline?
A little of both, I think. Thank you for that, Mark. I kind of want to follow on, because I think partly in the why question, what I was hearing was also a question of like, why did we come to the practice, and what motivated that? And then therefore maybe by extension, how would others be motivated to come to practice? So I think the answer for me, at least, is pretty clear. It's suffering. So basically, suffering is not a bad thing. It's a good. If you've suffered, that's great. And you might be motivated to do something about it. It happens that we live in a time where we have at our disposal maybe some of the greatest achievements of human society in the realm of the transformation of suffering. It's amazing. Like, we just, these traditions are available to us, and we can learn how to do that. And then I think, so when I think in terms of the polycrisis, like the wider situation, a little bit like what Elli said, I also feel like there's an aspect of crisis which is good. So that's the, like, in the individual sense, like suffering is good because it leads us towards wanting to transform our suffering and to understand it. But in the collective sense, it's the same. Like, when a worldview is unchallenged, when things are relatively stable, that's when you can't, the worldview is actually invisible. You can't see your fundamental assumptions because they're unchallenged. Everything's working. It's only when things stop working, when things start to break, that we have to ask ourselves these deeper questions again. So I think there's potentially something very positive about this polycrisis that we're in, because we get to ask these deeper questions and maybe find some better answers. And the other thing that I think that can motivate people, and this is also partly responding to one of the questions online, because somebody was asking, let me see if I can read the actual question to you. If we have free will, it seems that there are a lot of mean or ignorant people making others suffer. How do we incentivize these people to adopt this kind of open-minded, wise perspective? So it's a question about, like, how do we motivate people to change their course? And that's a question we could ask individually and collectively. And I think the most powerful answer to that is that our own transformation, when we do it and when it's deep enough, it is, it communicates, it resonates. So peace is something that we regularly underestimate. When I first encountered my teacher, he said things like peace in oneself, peace in the world. And I heard that and I thought, oh, come on, that's never going to work. That's not enough. You need legislation and regulation, and maybe you need to fight some wars, or, you need, like, pull on the big levers, like one person being peaceful. How is that going to make any difference? But I think if you look at the corollary, it's obviously the case that if we don't have peace in ourselves, then the world can't be at peace, because we are part of the world. And having met somebody like my teacher who was peace, right, not as some theoretical thing, like he just was, in his way of being, in his way of moving, in his way of doing anything, in his way of speaking, in the timbre and the quality of his voice, he just radiated a stillness and a peace that has literally changed the world. I mean, it's changing us now. It's still resonating after he died. It's changed millions of people, maybe I would even argue that it has fundamentally changed our collective consciousness already. It's changed the direction of civilization. One man's peace. So that's just an example. And that can become not one man, but many, many, many of us who can be touched by that. If we can allow that transformation to go deep enough, the world is already changed. So there were some other really easy questions in the chat. One was, how do we avert the polycrisis? I like that one. It's the starter for 10. And there was a related one about good and bad science. How do we, and maybe I can read that one as well. In your opinion, which principles of science are contributing with the polycrisis, and what other principles can help to avoid or stop this context? Can we imagine a scientific practice without the habits of productivism or technological obsession? So I think these are related questions, and I think it's for me it's really helpful to remember the vision, right? There's a deep wish in me to somehow. Woo, there goes my camera.
Fall down and show us the secrets of the room you're in.
I don't know what happened there. Okay. There we go. Some technical challenges. Does that still work?
I sometimes say when people join Zooms, we clean up the room around us, but can we clean up ourselves?
Okay. So I think, I really need to be continually getting back in touch with the vision. And there's an important kind of imaginative component of this. We need to be able to imagine a society which is more compassionate and more healthy, in which there is a deep understanding of reciprocity, a deep understanding of our non-separateness from nature and from the world, in which we see ourselves as not separate, just humans, but we see ourselves as one sort of interconnected part of the tapestry of life constantly unfolding. And then, so once we have that vision really clear, I'm talking about the polycrisis here. How do you avert the polycrisis? This is part of it, right? And how do we do better kind of science? Then we have to ask ourselves, well, what are the obstacles to that? And for me, one of these fundamental obstacles is this belief in the fundamental meaninglessness of reality, right? Of just reality as matter. So scientific materialism I see as a real obstacle to that deeply interconnected view of everything as being alive, everything as being worthy of care and reverence and wonder, right? So we somehow know that we need wonder, we need awe, we need all of these wonderful things, we need meaning, but we have a worldview which is profoundly opposed to those things. So then we have to ask, well, how did this worldview come about, and how do we disentangle ourselves from this worldview? So we need basically a science of interbeing. We need a science which is founded actually on these principles of non-separation and non-separability of anything. And that's a big challenge, and it's great to have a challenge because we have something to do. I would say that that's partly what we're doing tonight. We're already kind of starting to address that in some real, very real ways. I think, like, fundamentally from the point of view of what is good science and what is bad science in that context, the simplest thing I can say about it is that science should be, from my point of view, science should be methodology. Science is a methodology. It's not a worldview. When science becomes a worldview, it's bad science. Right, you can, I don't know, stick that under your hat and think about it. Take that home with you. Science has nothing to say about metaphysics and ontology, actually. Right? And I know maybe many scientists would disagree with me about that. Maybe they feel like metaphysics and ontology have already been resolved. So people like Stephen Hawking would say that science is gradually basically encroaching on the territory of philosophy and religion and doing a better job at it and solving all of these deep problems. This to me is just wrong. It's just not the case. There are certain questions which are not within the scope of science. So how do you be a good scientist? You have to have humility, a little bit like what Mark was saying. Like this aspect of epistemic humility is absolutely crucial. You have to know the limits of science to do good science. And then the other aspect of it is scientists are human beings first. And so actually to do good science, you need to be a well human being. And we often forget this, like you need to take care of the human, you need to take care of the mammal, you know? So we need to take care of our emotional well-being. And there's one final thing I want to say about this, which is part of the piece of like, how do we change our worldview? How do we not get stuck in dogmatic thinking? For example, like techno-solutionism or, you know, the belief in growth or, you know, all of these things are dogmas. So how do we get unstuck from these things? We have to understand the mechanism of cognitive dissonance, right? So actually we have lots of evidence that these dogmas are wrong. That evidence is available, right? It's not hard to find. So why do we not adjust our view according to the new evidence? Because of cognitive dissonance, because basically the longer we have gone on with our view against the evidence, the more shameful it is to let go of our wrong view and conform ourselves to the evidence. It's a process of, it's deeply shameful. It's embarrassing, especially publicly. We've made up a reputation, maybe a whole career based on espousing a certain set of views. We've maybe become famous, and so to say, oh, sorry everyone, I was wrong. That's a deeply shameful thing. And as a mammal, so again, this is the embodied mammal dimension, shame is an embodied feeling which is horrible. It is deeply unpleasant. And as disembodied scientists who have been trained to live the life of the mind and ignore our bodies, we don't know how to be with painful physical sensations, right? So all of this practice of Buddhism, of mindfulness, of coming back to the steps and the breath and paying attention to the body and paying attention to our emotions is also training us to learn that it's okay to feel an unpleasant physical sensation like shame. It's okay. It's not going to kill us. It's fine. Once you can feel that, you go like, oh yeah, this is not pleasant, but I'm not going to die. It's okay. I can deal with it. That's the door to changing our mind, right? Once we can actually go through that unpleasant physical experience, we can accept like the public experience of saying, I was wrong. Yes, it's a little bit unpleasant, but it's fine. No big deal. And then in fact, it's very rewarding because we get to change our mind, and that's wonderful. And we get to discover new things. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Well, I wish, as we always say, we could chat for several lifetimes. I'll add in a few words and then we'll move on to our closing remarks. But yeah, just to say from my perspective, thank you for all these questions. We really hope tonight is the beginning of a conversation. So while we are limited in time and space, and we'll wrap up, just to say, you know, my deep aspiration, building these bridges, having these conversations, building community, having these spaces, I think that is so hopeful. And some other good news as a researcher, even within my limitations, that we really saw in that study, in many studies that we can start reading, download the papers, connect with communities, find out who's doing this locally. Please go run your own research studies. I'm looking at my students. I can't wait to see what you add. It's a gift to be part of this river, right? To really acknowledge the wisdom that comes before us and to say about bridges, this is in the spirit of science and Dharma, that we reference and cite the river that came before us. We notice that wisdom, it pours into us. We're part of the stream, and then we protect the water, the young folks, the next part of the stream after us. So it's a gift to be here having this conversation. And at the heart of this is applied mindfulness, this idea that it is trainable. that all these things that we're wondering about, if we feel overwhelmed, they're trainable in ourselves, they're trainable in our communities. Michelle Chabon, one of my mentors, is here, who once said, just a little sprinkle of salt in a soup can change the whole soup. And so just to remember that. One last thing I'm going to say before I pass it off, if my students want to come up, and Denise, you'll be giving some closing remarks in a moment. Just to say, on April 6th, for anyone who can be in Toronto, we have another event, Healing Songs, that is a night of Indigenous dance, mindfulness practice, and song. And it is an embodied experience of everything we're talking about tonight. So if you want to see the how, come join us then. We'll share it in the post email. There's a poster outside, and I'm going to pass it to Denise to speak for one moment, one of our wonderful collaborators from the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Brother Phap Linh. Thank you, Ellie, Alana, BPSU, and University of Toronto. That was amazing. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here today. I remember it was just a little over a year ago, Ellie, when you and I had a wonderful walk together on a cloudy day in Boston to catch up, and the idea for this event came up. I'm honored to speak to you today on behalf of the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. Our mission at the foundation is to continue the incredible legacy, teachings, and practices of our dear teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, or Tay, as we call him in Vietnamese. So this event is very much in line with his legacy. He saw very early on the interconnectedness between science and spirituality. Both science and spirituality are interested in understanding the nature of existence and the meaning of life. And Thich Nhat Hanh believes science and spirituality has a real opportunity to address the root causes of suffering that we see in our bodies and our minds and hearts. So whether you're a scientist, a student, or a person interested in mindfulness, I know many of you are here today because you have an aspiration to understand more about the world, and you want to do some good for our society and planet. And as you've heard today, and I'll reiterate what Brother Phap Linh said, in order to do that effectively, Thich Nhat Hanh always said it needs to begin with you first. Observing your mind and emotions, understanding who you really are, cultivating openness, and just taking care of yourself. Before you can go out and help others, you need to take care of yourself. So you can't do that if you're burnt out or you're suffering. And I think many of us understand that conceptually, but it's really hard to put in practice for our own well-being. So I just wanted to let you know the foundation is here for you as a resource. So I'm here to talk about the what. So there are a myriad of ways you can start dipping your toes. Maybe you just want to dip your toe, or you can plunge in deep. You can try out a day of mindfulness, an online course, or a retreat in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. You can find a community of mindfulness practitioners to support you. Our tradition has a podcast, an app, books, music, and you'll be getting an email after this event with links. All these resources I've mentioned are efforts the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation touches in some way through our work, and supported by donations from incredible supporters around the world. Whatever mindful step you choose to make, and I hope you do make one, we're here for you. So please don't hesitate to learn more about the foundation at tnhf.org, or you can reach us at info@tnhf.org. And thank you so much again.
So we just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. And we'd like to invite you to maybe, if you'd like, close your eyes, be aware of your surroundings, notice the ground beneath you, and take a slow, deep in breath and out breath. And whenever you feel ready, you can open your eyes for our goodbye.
So we're gonna end this off on a very, very exciting note. So for the participants joining us online, you can drop in the chat any emojis that express how you feel right now. And for the participants in person, we would like to invite you to just I don't know, also express physically. We'll toggle the camera to you and yeah, and I'll count you in. So be ready. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you all.